Okay, that question didn't make any sense at all. If a woman's pushing her car, stopped at a hotel, and realized she was bankrupt, where would that say anyway that it was Monopoly? Anyway, welcome in. Congrats on getting first pretzel. It is a fairy tale night, and I'm having to run things on manual because my controller board decided to stop working. At least it doesn't recognize OBS is on, so complications just gotta be there. But that's what happens. I think I may have fixed Cyberpunk, but I'm going to test it over the weekend just to make sure. And I think Baldur's Gate may possibly improve, but it's again something I'll have to check on. I spent all day yesterday trying to, well, not yesterday, all day Wednesday trying to get the computer so it would actually work right. And for some reason, it completely overloaded my main hard drive. So I had to do a lot of cleaning and such. But hopefully, I think I got the problem solved. And if not, we will go with what we have. It looks like my sound is doing good. I guys forgot which where my microphone was again. Because I've been having to resort so many different things. Over this weekend, I may just pull up my computer and rewire everything. It depends on what kind of mood I end up in. I should probably check it out anyway. Let's see. My control board isn't working. I have to change everything manually. So, okay. The light is not on the cat camera. But the cats haven't been sleeping on the bed anyway, so we'll just make it disappear for now. My alerts will still show up down there. But yeah. I think, how many stories did we get through last week? Oh, well, we have a long one to start with. Let's see. Yep. Did 5 stories last week. We will have to see how many we can do this week. Because Hans Christian Andersen does write longer stories. And of course, the first one we have tonight is one that Disney kind of butchered. Of course, I can say that about most fairy tales, but that's me. Go. Here's our. Well, it's 9:04. Did I start this early? I mean, I don't know how many more people are going to show up. Let's. That's not the window I need to open. Okay. But anyway, our first story for tonight, which has a lot more vivid imagery than the Disney movies even started to have. Okay. Let's make sure my outside noise was turned off. The Little Mermaid. Far out in the wide sea, where the water is as blue as the loveliest cornflower, and as clear as the purest crystal, where it is so deep that very, very many church towers must be heaped one upon another in order to reach the lowest depth to the surface above. There dwell the merpeople. Now, you must not imagine that there is nothing but sand below the water. No, indeed, far from it. Trees and plants of wondrous beauty grow there, whose stems and leaves are so light that they are waved to and fro by the slightest motion of the water, almost as if they were living beings. Fishes, big and small, glide in and out among the branches, just as birds fly among our trees and hedges. And where the water is deepest, there stands the palace of the Mer King. The walls of the palace are of coral, and the high pointed windows are of amber. The roof, however, is composed of mussel shells, which, as the billows pass over them, are continually opening and shutting. This looks exceedingly pretty, as each of the mussel shells contains a number of bright, glittering pearls, one alone of which would be the most costly ornament in the diadem of a king in the upper world. The Mer-King, who lived in this palace, had been a widower for many years. His old mother managed the household affairs for him most efficiently. She was a very clever woman, but extremely proud of her high birth and station, for which reason she wore 12 oysters on her tail, whilst the other inhabitants of the sea, even those distinction, were only allowed 6. In every other respect she merited unlimited praise, especially for the affection she showed to the 6 little princesses, her granddaughters. They were all very beautiful children, but the youngest was the most lovely. Her skin was as soft and delicate as a rose petal, and her eyes were as blue as the sea. But, like all other mermaids, she had no feet. Her body ended in a tail, like that of a fish. All day long the children used to play in the spacious rooms of the palace, where beautiful flowers grew out of the walls on all sides around them. When large amber windows were opened, fishes would swim into these apartments, just as swallows might fly into our rooms. But the fishes were bolder than swallows. They swam straight up to the little princesses, ate from their hands, and allowed themselves to be stroked. In front of the palace there was a large garden filled with fiery red and dark blue trees. The fruit upon them glittered like gold, and the flowers resembled bright burning suns. Their stems and leaves swayed in the breeze. The sand that formed the soil of the garden was of a bright blue color, somewhat like flames of sulphur, and a strangely beautiful blue was spread over the whole, so that one might have fancied oneself raised very high in the air, with the sky at once above and below, and yet one was at the bottom of the sea. When the flowers were quite still, the sun might be seen looking like a purple flower out of whose cup streamed the light of the world. Each of the little princesses had her own plot in the garden, where she might plant and sow at her pleasure. One chose her plot to be made in the shape of a whale, another preferred hers to look like a little mermaid. But the youngest princess had hers quite round as the sun, and she planted in it only those flowers that were red as blood. She was a strange child, very quiet and thoughtful. Whilst her sisters were adorning their plots with all sorts of gay things that might have fallen into their hands from strange ships, The youngest asked for nothing, apart from those red flowers which were so much like the sun, but a beautiful white marble statue of a boy, and this only had come from a wrecked ship. She put the marble statue into her pot and planted a weeping willow by its side. That, too, was red as blood. It grew quickly and let its long boughs flow over the statue into the blue sand, where ever-moving shadows played in violet hues. It looked as if the boughs and roots had embracing each other and were also kissing the statue of the graceful young boy. Nothing pleased the little princess more than to hear about the world of human beings living above the sea. She made her old grandmother tell her everything she knew about the ships, the towns, the men, and the land animals, and she was particularly pleased when she heard that the flowers of the upper world had a pleasant fragrance, for the flowers of the sea are scentless, and that the woods were green, and that the fish fluttered among the branches of trees could sing with a clear, loud voice. The old lady, of course, meant birds, but she called them fishes because her grandchildren, having never seen a bird, would not understand otherwise. Welcome in, Arthur. How is your reading? Yeah, Whitman usually is. Say, we're in The Little Mermaid, and it's already nothing like Disney. I'll have to get my Whitman out and read some of it. I haven't read any from him for a while. Oh, yeah. I do like good fairy tale, where I can get the authors, it's better. If I could speak Dutch and read Dutch, I'd probably do it in the actual language, but translations have to do. If you need to do any extra care, feel free. Again, thank you for the raid. Oh, there's a Villian, which I don't think I caught before. Hmm, barely got that one. Well, finally, the first voice I get to do for the night, so that'll be fun. And you have attained your 15th year, she added. You will be permitted to rise to the surface of the sea. You will then sit by moonlight on the rocky cliffs, and you will see the big ships sail past, and you will see the woods and the towns and even the singing fishes. Next year, the eldest of the sisters would reach this happy age. The second sister was a year younger than the eldest, and the third a year younger than the second, for each of them was 1 year younger than the preceding one. So the youngest had still 6 whole years to wait until that joyful time should come when she might also rise to the surface of the water and see what is going on in the upper world. However, the eldest promised to tell her and the others everything about what she may see when the first day of her being of age arrived. But the grandmother gave them but little information, and when the children asked her about one thing or another, she used to say, "Be patient, you'll see for yourselves." But None of the sisters longed so ardently for the day that she could see the earth as the youngest, who were the longest to wait, and so was quite thoughtful. Many a night she stood by the open amber window, looking up at the clear blue water where the fishes were leaping around and playing with each other. She could see the moon and the stars. The light was pale through the water, and they appeared larger than they do to those who live in the upper world. If a shadow passed over them, she knew it must be either a whale or a ship full of human beings sailing by. Never could these last have imagined that far beneath them, the loveliest little mermaid was passionately stretching forth her white hands towards the ship's keel. The day had now arrived for the eldest princess, who had attained her 15th year, and was therefore allowed to rise up to the surface and see. When she returned, she had 1,000 things to relate. Her chief pleasure had been to sit upon a sandbank in the moonlight, looking at the large town which lay on the coast, where lights were beaming like stars, and music was playing. She had heard the distant noise of men and carriages, and she had seen the high church towers, had listened to the ringing of bells, and just because she could not go on shore, she longed the more after all these things. How attentively the youngest sister listened to her words, and next, yeah, when next she stood at night by her open window, gazing upward through the dark blue water, her thoughts dwelt so eagerly upon the great city, full of life and sound, that she fancied she could hear the church bells ringing. Next year, the second sister received permission to swim wherever she pleased. She rose to the surface of the sea just when the sun was setting, and this sight so delighted her that she declared it to be more beautiful than anything else she had ever seen above the waters. The whole thing seemed tinged with gold, she said, and it is impossible for me to describe to you the beauty of the clouds, now red, now violet. They glided over me, but still more swiftly there flew over the water a flock of white swans just when the sun was descending. I followed them with my eyes, but the sun disappeared, and the bright rosy light on the surface of the sea and on the edge of the clouds died away gradually. That was the most beautiful sight. There could not be anything more delightful. It was now time for the third sister to visit the upper world. She was the boldest of the six, and ventured up a river from its estuary in the sea, 3 miles towards the source. On the shore she saw green hills covered with woods and vineyards, among which stood houses and castles. She heard the birds singing, and the sun shone with so much power that she continually was obliged to plunge below in order to cool her burning face. In a little bay she met with a number of children who were bathing and jumping around. She would have joined their gambols, but the children fled back to the land in great terror. A little black animal barked at her. It was a dog, but she had never before seen a dog, and it frightened her so much that she swam back to the sea. But never could she forget the green woods, the verdant hills, and the pretty children who, although they had no fins, could swim about in the water. The fourth sister was not so bold. She remained in the open sea, but declared on her return home that she thought that nothing could be more beautiful. There were no limits to your gaze, and the sky above looked like a cupola made of glass. She had seen ships sailing by so far off that they looked like seagulls. She had watched the merry dolphins gamboling in the water, and the enormous whales had sent up the air pillars of water with their noses, and that looked like 1,000 sparkling fountains. The year after, the fifth sister attained her 15th year. Her birthday happened at a different season from that of her other sisters. It was winter, so she saw things which the others had not seen at their first outing. The sea was the green color, and immense icebergs were floating on its surface. Each of them, she said, looked like a pearl, although it had much larger than a church tower in the land of human beings. She sat down upon one of these pearls and let the wind play with her long hair, and all the ships hoisted their sails in terror and escaped as quickly as possible. In the evening the sky was covered with clouds, and whilst the restless sea made the great mountains of ice sink and rise, flashes of lightning burst forth from the clouds, and the thunder rolled on, peal after peal. The sails of all ships were instantly furled, and terror and anxiety reigned on board. She, however, the fifth princess, remained sitting still on her iceberg, looking unconcernedly when the blue zigzag of the lightning flashes fell into the foaming sea. The first time that any of these sisters rose out of the sea, she was quite enchanted at the sight of so many new and beautiful objects. But the novelty soon wore off, and when the grown-up ladies, as they were, at liberty to rise as often as they pleased, they were not so eager anymore, and after a few weeks they said that their home down below was far more attractive than the upper world. One could live together so cozy. Now and then, of the evening, the five sisters would rise hand in hand from the depth of the ocean. They had beautiful voices, far sweeter than any human voice, and when a storm was coming on, they would swim in front of the ships and sing, describing the happiness of those who lived at the bottom of the sea, and entreating the sailors not to be afraid, but to come down to them. But the mariners did not understand what they sang. They thought what they heard was only the whistling of the wind, and thus they never learned of the hidden glories of the sea. For if the ships were wrecked, all on board were drowned, and none but dead men ever entered the Mer-King's palace. Whilst the five sisters were swimming at evening time, the youngest would remain alone in her father's palace, looking up at them. She felt like weeping, but mermaids cannot weep, and therefore they suffer indefinitely more than human beings do. If I was but 15, she cried, I know I shall love the upper world and the humans who dwell there. At last, the time she had so longed for had arrived. Well, now it is your turn, said the grandmother. Come here and let me adorn you like you sisters. And she placed on the little princess's hair a wreath of white lilies, whose every petal was one half a pearl. Then she commanded 8 oysters to fasten themselves to the princess's tail, in token of her high rank. But they're so very uncomfortable, they hurt, said the young princess. One must not mind slight inconveniences when one wishes to look well, said the old lady. How willingly would the young princess have given up all this splendor and exchanged her heavy crown for the red flowers of her garden, which were so much more becoming of her. But she dared not do so. Farewell, she said, and then she rose from the sea as light as a flake of foam. When for the first time in her life she appeared on the surface of the water, the sun had just sunk below the horizon, but all the clouds were still glowing with bright golden and rosy hues like the flowers in her plot. The evening star was shining in the pale western sky. The air was mild and refreshing, and the sea was as smooth as a looking glass. A large ship with 3 masts lay still in the water. One sail only was unfurled, for not a breath was stirring, and the sailors were quietly seated on the cordage and ladders of the vessel. Music and song resounded from the deck, and after it grew dark, hundreds of lamps of all sudden burst forth into the light, so that the ship was outlined in a colorful glow against the dark sky. The little mermaid swam close up to the captain's cabin, and every now and then, when she was raised by the motion of the water, she could see through the clear window panes. She saw within many richly dressed men. The handsomest among them was a young prince with large dark eyes. He could not be more than 16 years old, and in honor of his birthday that the grand festival was being held, and saw that splendor on the ship. The crew were dancing on deck. When the young prince appeared among them, hundreds of rockets were sent up into the air, turning night into day, and so terrifying the little mermaid that for some minutes she plunged beneath the water. But soon she raised her little head again, and then it seemed as if all the stars were falling down upon her. Large suns revolved around her, bright fishes floated in the air, and all these marvels were reflected on the clear surface of the water. It was so bright on the ship that everything could be seen clearly. And how beautiful the young prince was! He shook hands with the sailors and laughed and jested with them, whilst sweet notes of music mingled in the silence of the night. It had become late, but the little mermaid could not tear herself away from the ship and the handsome young prince. She remained looking through the cabin window, rocked to and fro by the waves. The little lamps were extinguished, and no more shining rockets were sent up into the air. The guns had stopped thundering, and it was only at the bottom of the sea that the echo of the salutes reverberated. Suddenly there was a foaming and fermentation in the depths beneath, and the ship began to move on faster. The sails were spread, the waves rose high, thick clouds gathered over the sky, and the noise of distant thunder was heard. Sailors saw that a storm was coming, so they again furled the sails. The great vessel was tossed about in the tempestuous ocean as though it were a light boat, and the waves rose to an immense height, towering over the ship like mountains. The vessel alternately sank beneath and rose above them. To the little mermaid, this seemed most delightful, but the ship's crew thought very differently. The vessel creaked and groaned, and the stout masts bent under the violence of the wind as though they were thin reeds. Then, all of a sudden, the ship turned over, and the water rushed in. The little mermaid now realized that the crew were in danger, for she herself was forced to beware of the beams and splinters torn from the vessel and floating about on the waves. At the same time, it became pitch dark, so that she could not distinguish anything. Presently, however, a dreadful flash of lightning disclosed to her the whole of the wreck. Her ship sought the young prince, and the very moment the ship sank it to the bottom. At first, she was delighted, thinking that the prince would now come back to her abode, but she soon remembered that humans cannot live in the water, and that therefore, if the prince ever entered her father's palace, he would be dead. But no, he must not die. She swam through the fragments with which the waters were strewn, regardless of the danger she was incurring, and braving the towering waves. At last she found the prince, all but exhausted. His arms and legs were tired, and he was keeping his head above water with great difficulty. He had already closed his beautiful eyes, and he would inevitably have drowned, had not the little mermaid come to the rescue. She seized hold of him and kept him above water, letting the current bear them on together. In the morning, the storm had subsided. No trace whatsoever had remained of the ship. The sun rose like a ball of fire out of the sea, and it looked like as if the prince's lips had come to life again, and the sun's rays seemed to restore color to his cheeks. But his eyes were still closed. The little mermaid kissed his fine, high forehead and stroked his wet hair away from his face. He looked like the marble statue in her garden. She kissed him again and wished most fervently that he might recover. She now saw the dry land with snow-capped mountains glittering in the sun. The green wood extended along the coast, and at the entrance of the wood stood a building, chapel, or church, or convent. She was not sure which. Citron and melon trees with yellow fruits grew in the garden adjoining it. An avenue of tall palm trees led up to the door. Here the sea formed a little bay, which the water was quite smooth, but very deep. Under the cliffs there was firm, dry sand. Hither swam the little mermaid with a seemingly dead prince. She laid him upon the warm sand and took care to place his head high and to turn his face to the sun. The bells began to ring in the large white building which stood before her, and a number of young girls came out to walk in the garden. The mermaid swam away from the shore and hid herself behind some stones and covered her head with foam so that her little face would not be seen, and watched the prince with unremittent attention. It was not long before one of the young girls approached. She seemed quite frightened at finding the prince in a state, apparently dead. Soon, however, she recovered herself and ran back to tell her sisters. The little mermaid saw that the prince revived, and that all around smiled joyfully and kindly upon him. But he did not send any smile to her. He did not know it was she who had saved him. And when the prince was taken into the house, she felt so sad that she immediately plunged beneath the water and returned to her father's palace. If she had been quiet and thoughtful before, she now grew even more so. Her sisters asked her what she had seen that first time in the upper world, but all she said was a ship and a house, and then she fell silent and said no more. Many an evening and many a morning she rose to the little bay where she had left the prince. She saw the snow on the mountains melt, the fruits in the garden ripened and were gathered, but the prince she never saw, so she always returned sorrowfully to her home under the sea. Her only pleasure was to sit in her little garden and to put her arms around the beautiful marble statue that was so like the prince. She no longer cared for her flowers. They grew wild in profusion, covered the steps and the path, and entwined their long stems and tendrils among the boughs of the trees, until her whole garden became a dark bower. At last, being unable to bear her sorrow any longer, she revealed the secret to one of her sisters, who told it to the other princesses, who passed it on to some friends. Among those friends was a young mermaid who remembered the prince, having herself been an eyewitness to the festivities on his ship. She knew also in what country the prince lived, and even the name of its king. "Come, little sister," said the five princesses, and embracing her, they rose together, arm in arm, out of the water, just in front of the prince's palace. The palace was built of bright yellow stones, and a flight of white marble steps led down from it down to the sea. Gilded cupolas crowned the building, and white marble figures, which might almost have been taken for real men and women, were placed among the pillars surrounding it. Through the clear glass of the high windows one could look into magnificent apartments hung with silken curtains, and the walls adorned with beautiful paintings. In the center of the largest room they saw a fountain playing, whose waters sprang up so high to catch the glittering cupola above, through which fell the sunbeams dancing in the water. Now the little mermaid knew where her beloved prince dwelt, and henceforth she went there almost every evening. She often approached nearer the land than her sisters ever ventured, and even swam up the narrow channel that followed under the marble balcony. Here on bright moonlit nights she would sit, her hair enveloping her like a cloak, and watch the young prince whilst he believed himself alone. Sometimes she saw him sailing on the water in a gaily painted boat. She would then hide among the green reeds which grew on the banks, and when the prince was noticing the rustling of her long silver veil, he thought it was the swan flapping its wings. Many a night, when the fishermen were casting their nets by the beacon's light, she heard them talking of the prince and relating how noble actions he had performed. She was then happy, thinking how she had saved his life when struggling with the waves, remembering how his head had rested on her bosom, and how she had kissed him when she knew nothing of it, and could never even dream of her existence. Human beings became more and more dear to her every day. She wished that she were one of them. Their world seemed to her much larger than that of her father's kingdom. They could sail over the ocean in ships. They could climb to the summits of those high mountains that rose above the clouds, and their wooded domains extended much farther than a mermaid's eye could penetrate. There were many things that she wished to have explained, but her sisters could not give her any satisfactory answers. So she had to ask the old grandmother, who knew a great deal about the upper world, which she used to call the country above the sea. "Do men, when they are not drowned, live forever?" she asked one day. "Do they not die as we do and live at the bottom of the sea?" "Yes," was her grandmother's reply. "They must die as we do, and their life is much shorter than ours. We live to the age of 300 years, and when we die, we become a foam on the sea, and are not allowed even to share a grave among those that are dear to us. We have no immortal souls. We can never live again, and are like the green rushes which, when once cut down, are withered forever. Human beings, however, have souls that continue to live when their bodies become dust. And as we rise out of the water to admire the abode of men, so these souls ascend to glorious unknown dwellings in the skies, which we are not permitted to see." "Why have we not immortal souls?" asked the Little Mermaid. "I would willingly give up 200 years. I would willingly give up the 285 years I have in front of me to be a human being for only one day, lest become entitled to that heavenly world above." "You must not think of that," answered the grandmother. "You are much better off as one of us. We live longer and are happier than human beings." "So I must die and be dashed like foam over the sea, never to rise again and to hear the gentle murmur of the oceans, never again to see the beautiful flowers and the bright sun, and the marble staircase that leads to the princess's palace. Tell me, dear grandmother, is there no means by which I can obtain an immortal soul?" "No, there is not," said the old lady. "Unless you could win the affection of a human being, and as to become dear to him, then either father or mother. If he joined you with all his heart, and promised whilst the priest joined his hand to yours, to be always faithful to you, then his soul would flow into yours, and yet he would retain that. That is a marvelous thing, and you will become a partaker of human bliss. But that can never be, for what in our eyes is the most beautiful part of our body, our tail? The inhabitants of the earth think them hideous, and they cannot bear it. To appear handsome to them, the body must have two clumsy props which they call legs, and that is all I'm going to tell you." The little mermaid sighed and looked wistfully at the scaly part of her body, otherwise so fair and delicate. "We are happy," added the old lady. "We shall jump and swim about merrily for 300 years, and that is a long time, and afterwards we shall repose peacefully in death. And this evening we are going to have a court ball." The ball of which the grandmother spoke was far more splendid than any that the earth has ever seen. The halls of the great hall were crystal, very thick yet clear. Hundreds of large mussel shells were planted in rows among them. Some of these shells were rose-colored, some green as grass, but all sending forth a bright light, which not only illuminated the whole apartment, but also shone through the glassy walls as they light up the waters around, and making the scales of countless fishes, crimson and purple, silver and gold-colored, appear more brilliantly than before. Over the center of the hall flowed a bright, clear stream, on the surface of which danced seamen, mermen, and mermaids to the melody of their own sweet voices, voices far sweeter than those of men. The little princess sang most sweetly of all. Her father kissed her in appreciation, and the mermen clapped their hands and applauded her. For a moment it pleased her to be thus reminded that neither on earth nor in the sea was there more beautiful voice than hers. But her thoughts soon returned to the world above her. She could not forget the handsome prince, and sorrowed that she could not have an immortal soul. She stole away from her father's palace, and lost all the joy within. She sat alone in her little neglected garden. Suddenly she heard the tone of horns resounding over the water, and she said to herself, "Now he is sailing above there, he whom I love more than my father and my grandmother. with whom my thoughts are constantly occupied, to whom I would so willingly trust the happiness of my life. Oh, why risk leaving him in the matter so? With my sister dancing in the palace, I need to go to the enchantress, whom I have hitherto feared so much. Perhaps she can advise me and help me. So the little mermaid left the garden and went to the foaming whirlpool beyond which dwelt the enchantress. She had never been this way before. There were no flowers here, nor any seagrass, only bare gray sand. The waters of the whirlpool were eddying and bubbling, and she was obliged to make her way through the horrific place. And then she had to pass through the slimy bog, which the enchantress called her turf moor. Her house stood in a wood beyond this. All the trees and bushes looked round like 100-headed serpents. Their branches were long, slimy arms with fingers of worms, every member from the root to the tip, ceaselessly moving and extending on all sides. Whatever they seized, they fastened upon so that it could not loose itself from their grasp. The little mermaid stood still for a moment and looked at the horrible wood, her heart beating with fear, and she would certainly have returned without obtaining her object, had she not remembered the prince and immortality. The thought gave her new courage. She tied her long hair firmly round her head so that the serpent-like plants could not catch hold of it, and crossed her delicate arms over her bosom. And swifter than a fish can glide through the water, she passed through these same seemingly trees, and stretched their eager arms after her in vain. She saw that every tree had something in its grasp, held as firmly as 1,000 little arms that if not enclosed by iron hands. The skulls of human beings who had been drowned in the sea, helms, chests, skeletons of land animals, even a little mermaid whom they had seized and strangled. That indeed was a most fearful sight for the unfortunate little princess. But she got through this wood of horrors. When she arrived at a slimy spot where immense fat snails were crawling about on their ugly yellow bodies, in the midst of the place stood a house built out of bones of unfortunate people who had been shipwrecked. Here sat the witch, caressing a toad as some people would stroke a bird. The ugly fat snails she called her chickens, and she permitted them to crawl about her. I know full well what you are going to ask of me, said the little prince. She said to the little princess, your wish is foolish enough, yet it shall be fulfilled, though it is sure to bring misfortune to you, my dear child. You wish to get rid of your tail, to have instead two stilts like those of human beings, in order that a young prince may fall in love with you, and love you more than himself, so that you may obtain an immortal soul. And she laughed so violently that the toad felt her up. You have come just at the right time, she continued. Had you come after sunsets, I should not have been able to help you for a whole year. I shall prepare a drink for you, and with it you must swim up to the land of the humans before sunrise. You must sit on the shore and drink it. Then your tail will split in two and become what humans call legs. This will, however, be very painful. You will feel as though a sharp knife passes through your body. All who look on you will say that you are the loveliest child on earth. You'll retain your undulating way of walking, as no dancer will move so lightly. But every step you take will cause you unbearable pain. It will seem to you as though you were walking on swords, and your blood will flow. If you think you can endure this suffering, I will help you. Yes, I can, answered the princess with a faltering voice. and thought of the young prince and of her immortal soul. "Only remember," said the witch, "once you have received a human soul, you can never again become a mermaid. You will never return to your sisters in your father's palace, never to your grandmother and to your little garden. And unless you win the prince's love to such a degree that he leaves his mother and father for you, and clings to you with all his thoughts and wishes, and unless the priest joins your hands, you will become so that you become husband and wife. You will never obtain the immortal soul that you are craving for. Morning of the day on which he is united in matrimony to another woman. That morning your heart will break and you will die and become foam on the sea. And yet I will venture it," said the little mermaid, pale and trembling, as if she were already about to die. "Besides all this, I must be paid, and it is no slight thing that I demand," continued the witch. "Yours is the sweetest voice of all the dwellers in the sea, and you are thinking of captivating the prince with it. This voice, however, you will give to me. The best thing you possess I require for my magic drink, and for I shall have to put it into my own blood to give it the sharpness of a two-edged sword." "But if I give you my voice," asked the little princess, "what have I left with which to charm the prince?" "You have your graceful form, your undulating walk, your expressive eyes. With such it shall be easy to infatuate the vain human heart. Well now, have you lost your courage? Put out your little tongue so that I may cut it off and take it for myself in return for my magic drink." "So be it," said the princess, and the witch set up her cauldron in order to mix her potion. "Cleanliness is a good thing," she remarked, and she took a handful of snails and tied them together and scrubbed the cauldron with them. Then she scratched her own skin and let the black blood trickle into the cauldron, every moment throwing in new ingredients. The smoke from the mixture assumed such horrible forms that they were enough to fill the beholder with terror, and the moaning and groaning proceeded as though from a crocodile were weeping. At last the drink was ready, and had become as clear and transparent as pure crystal. "Here it is," said the witch to the princess, and she cut out her tongue at the same moment. The poor little mermaid was now dumb, and she could neither sing nor speak. "If the branches of the trees of my beautiful wood should attempt to seize you as you pass," advised the witch, "sprinkle some of the liquid over them, and they will split into so many pieces, and you will not be able to count how many." But the princess did not have to follow the advice, for the branches drew back hastily as soon as they perceived the bright violet glittering in her hand like an evening star. Then she passed safely through the formidable wood, over the eerie moor, across the foaming maelstrom, and no harm befell her. From afar she gazed once again at her father's palace. The lamps of the stateroom were all extinguished. All the family was probably asleep already. The little mermaid would have loved to go in for one last time, and kiss them all goodbye, but she did not dare, for she could not speak. She was about to leave her beloved, beautiful home forever. She felt as though her heart would break at the thought, and she stole into the garden and plucked a flower from the bed of each of her sisters as remembrance, and threw 1,000 glances at her father's house, and rose to the dark blue waters to the world above. The sun had not yet risen when she arrived at the prince's dwelling. She sat down on the lowest step of the marble staircase. The moon still shone in the sky when the little princess drank off the magic liquid, and she felt it run through like a sharp knife. She fell down in a swoon, and lay for a long time as though lifeless. When the sun rose, she awoke, and felt a burning pain in all her limbs. But she saw standing close to her was the object of her love, the handsome young prince, and his dark eyes were fixed inquiringly on her. Shyly she cast down her eyes and perceived that instead of a long fish-like tail, she had two slender legs. But she was quite naked, and tried in vain to cover herself with her long thick hair. The prince asked her who she was and how she had got there, and she in reply smiled and gazed upon him with her bright blue eyes, for, alas, she could not speak. Then he led her by the hand into the palace. She found that all the witch had said had come true. She felt as though she were walking on the edges of sharp swords, but she bore the pain willingly. Holding the prince's hand, she ascended the broad staircase as lightly as if she were swan down, and all eyes followed her admiringly, and everybody praised her graceful way of walking. Rich and clothes, Rich clothes of silk and lace were brought to her. Wherever she walked, she was the loveliest of all, but she was mute, and could neither speak nor sing. Some female slaves, gaily dressed in gold brocade, sang before the prince and his royal parents, and one of them had a specially clear, sweet voice. The prince applauded and smiled at her. This made the little mermaid very sad, for she knew that she used to sing far better than the young slave, and she thought, "Hmm, but know that I was given away my voice forever for the sole purpose of being with him." The slaves began to dance their lovely, graceful dances to the tune of a flute. Now the little mermaid rose and stretched out her delicate white arms and lifted herself on tiptoe, floated over the marble floor. She danced as nobody on earth had ever danced before, and every motion displayed the perfect symmetry and elegance of her figure, and the expression in her eyes touched the hearts of the spectators far more than the song of the slaves had done. Everybody was enchanted, but especially the young prince who called her his little foundling. And she danced again and again, although every step caused her great pain. The prince then said that she should always be with him, and a sleeping place was prepared for her on velvet cushions in the anteroom of his own apartment. The prince caused a suit of male apparel to be made for her, in order that she might accompany him on rides and horseback. Together they traversed the fragrant woods where green boughs brushed against their temples, and little birds sang merrily among the fresh leaves. With him she climbed up steep mountains, and although her tender feet bled, which were observed by the attendants, for which she was pitied, she only smiled and followed her dear prince to the heights whence they could see the clouds chasing each other. But at night, when everybody in the palace was asleep, she would walk down the marble steps in order to cool her burning feet in the deep waters, and think of those beloved who dwelt below. One evening, as she was bathing her feet, her sisters ran together to the spot, arm in arm. She beckoned to them, and they immediately recognized her and told her how much sorrow she had caused them. From that time, the sisters visited her every night, and once they brought with them the old grandmother, who had not been to the upper world for many great years. They likewise brought their father, the Merkin. His hair had gone gray, and the crown on his head shimmered as though of stone. These two old people stretched their hands out to her, but did not venture near enough to speak. The little mermaid became dearer and dearer to the prince every day, but he only looked upon her as a sweet, gentle child, and the thought of making her his wife never entered his head. But his wife she would have to become, for she would never acquire an immortal soul, but would change into foam and be driven restlessly over the billows of the sea. "Do you love me? Do you love me more than all the others?" Her eyes seemed to ask when she pressed for farm. Her eyes seemed to ask when he pressed fondly on her arm, and kissed her lovely brow. "Yes, yes," the prince would say. "You are dearer to me than any other one, for no one is good as you. You're devoted to me, and you are again like the young maiden who saw but once and may never see again. I was on board a ship which was wrecked by a sudden tempest, and the waves threw me on the shore near a holy temple where a number of young girls were doing religious service. The youngest of them found me on the shore and saved my life. I saw her only once, but her image is vividly impressed upon my memory, and her alone I can love. But she belongs to the holy temple, and you who resemble her so much have been given to me for consolation. Never will we be parted. He does not know that it is I who saved his life, thought the little mermaid, sighing deeply. I bore him over the wild waves into the wooded bay, and laid him down on the sand in front of the holy temple. I sat behind the rocks covered with foam and waited till somebody should come. I saw the pretty maiden approach whom he loves more than me. And again she heaved a deep sigh, for she could not weep. He says that the young girl belongs to the holy temple. She never comes out into the world, so they cannot meet each other again. And I am always with him. I can see him daily. I will love him and devote my whole life to his service. The prince is going to be married to the beautiful daughter of the neighboring king, said the people, and that is why he is having that splendid ship fitted out. He is going to use it for a journey of courtship, and a large retinue is accompanying him. The little mermaid smiled at these and similar rumors, for she knew the prince's intentions better than anybody else. I must go. I must go, said Thor. I must see the beautiful princess. My parents wish me to do so, but they will not compel me to marry her and bring her home as my bride. It is quite possible for me to love her, for she cannot be so like that beautiful girl in the temple as you are. And if I were obliged to take a girl for my wife, I should prefer you, my little silent fountain, with the sparkling eyes. And he kissed her rosy lips and played with her long curls and folded her in his arms, whereupon she had a sweet vision of human happiness and immortal bliss. You are not afraid of the sea, my sweet silent child, he asked her as they stood together on the splendid ship which was to take them to the country of its neighboring king. And then he told her of the storms, the strange fishes, and all the wonderful things he had seen by divers described in books. And the little mermaid smiled at his words, for she knew better what it was to look at the bottom of the sea. At night time, when the moon shone brightly, and when all on board were asleep except the pilot, she would sit on the deck looking down into the sea. It seemed to her that she saw her father's palace and her grandmother's silver crown for the foamy track made by the ship's keel. Then her sisters would rise out of the water, looking sorrowful and stretching their hands towards her. She waved to them, smiling, and would have explained that everything was going to be according to her wishes, and she was happy. But then she but then the cabin boy approached, whereupon the sisters plunged into the water so suddenly that the boy thought what he had seen in the waves was nothing but foam. The next morning the ship entered the harbor of the neighboring king's splendid capital. All the church bells were rung, and trumpets sounded from the belfry of the palace, and soldiers marched in procession through the city with waving banners and glittering bayonets. Every day witnessed new entertainment. Balls and parties followed each other. The princess, however, was not yet in town. She had been sent to a distant convent for education, there to be taught the practice of royal virtues. At last, she had arrived at the palace. The little mermaid had been anxious to see this unparalleled princess, and now she was obliged to admit to herself that she had never before seen so beautiful a creature. Her skin was white and delicate, and the veins could be seen, and her dark eyes sparkled beneath a pair of long lashes. It is you, exclaimed the prince when they met. You who saved my life when I lay dead on the seashore. Oh, I am all too happy, he said to his. Oh, I am all too happy, he said to his dumb foundling. What I never dared to hope for has come to pass. You must rejoice in my happiness, for you love me more than all the others who surround me. And the little mermaid kissed his hand in silent sorrow. It seemed to her as if her heart were breaking already, although the morning of his marriage day, which would inevitably see her death, had not yet dawned. The engagement was announced. All the church bells rang. Silver lamps were burning in front of the altars. The incense burners emitted fragrant flames. The bride and bridegroom joined hands, whilst the holy words that united them were spoken. The Little Mermaid, clad in silk and gold, stood behind the princess and held the train of the bridal dress. But her ear heard nothing of solemn music. Her eyes saw nothing of the holy ceremony. She thought of her approaching end and realized that she had lost both this world and the next. That very same evening, bride and bridegroom went on board the ship. Cannons were fired and flags waved in the breeze. In the center of the deck was raised a magnificent pavilion of purple and gold cloth, fitted up with richest and softest couches. Here the princely pair were to spend the night. A favorable wind swelled the sails, and the ship glided lightly over the blue waters. As soon as it was dark, colored lamps were hung out, and dancing began on the deck. The little mermaid was reminded of what she had seen the first time she had risen to the upper world. The spectacle that now presented itself was equally splendid, and she was obliged to join the dance, gliding lightly as a bird over the ship's bulwarks. All applauded her, for never had she danced with more enchanting grace. The little feet suffered extremely, but she no longer felt the pain. The anguish of her heart, suffering was much greater. She knew it was the last evening she would ever see him for whom she had forsaken her home and family, and given away her beautiful voice, and suffered daily the most violent pain, all without having the least suspicion. It was the last evening that she could breathe the same air as her beloved, that she would behold the deep blue sea and the starry heavens and eternal nights, on which she would neither think nor dream awaited her. All was joy on the ship, and she, her heart filled with the thoughts of death, smiled and danced with the others till past midnight. Then the prince kissed his lovely bride, and arm in arm they entered the magnificent tent prepared for their repose. All now was still. The stairmaid alone stood at the ship's helm. The little mermaid rested her wide arms on the balusters and looked toward the east, watching for the dawn. She well knew that the first sunbeam would witness her disillusion. She saw her sisters rise out of the sea, deadly pale with their features, long hair no longer fluttering over their shoulders. It had all been cut off. "We have given it to the witch," they said, "to make her help you, so that you may not die this night. In exchange, she has given us a sharp knife. Look, here it is. Before the sun rises, you must plunge it into the prince's heart, and when his warm blood trickles down on your feet, they will again be changed to a fish-like tail. Then you will once become a mermaid, and will be able to dive down into us and live in your allotted span of 300 years before you become foam on the water. But hasten, one of you has to die before the sun rises, either you or he. Our aged grandmother has mourned for you so much that the gray hair has fallen off through sorrow, and hers fell under the scissors of the witch. Kill the prince and come down to us. Hasten! Can you see the red streak of the eastern sky announcing the approaching of the sun? A few minutes more, and all will be over for you." These words they sighed deeply and vanished. The little mermaid drew aside the purple curtains of the pavilion. There lay the beautiful bride in the arms of the bridegroom. She kissed the prince's forehead, and glanced at the sky over the dawning light, became brighter every moment. The prince's lips unconsciously murmured the name of his bride. He was dreaming of her, and her alone, while the fatal knife trembled in the hand of the unhappy mermaid. All at once she threw the instrument of death far out into the sea. The waves rose like a bright blazing flames around it, and the water fell where it seemed tinged with blood. With eyes fast becoming dim and fixed, she looked once more at her beloved prince, then plunged from the ship into the sea, and felt her body slowly but surely and gently dissolving at the foam. The sun rose from the waters of the sea. The beams fell softly and warmly upon her, so that the little mermaid was scarcely aware that she was dying. She saw the glorious sun. Above her head there hovered 1,000 beautiful transparent forms, so transparent were they that, although she could distinguish the white floating sails from the ship, red clouds of sky, The voices of these airy creatures had a melody so sweet and soothing that a human ear would be as little able to catch the sound as the eye to discern the forms. Borne through the air by their own lightness, they hovered about her without wings, affectionately and tenderly, with a wondrous serenity. The little mermaid saw that they were body of the transparent as theirs, and felt herself gradually raised from the foam into the sea to higher regions. Why are they taking me? She asked, no longer voiceless, and her, in a sense, sounded just like the voices of those heavenly beings. You're the daughters of the air, they answered. The mermaid has no mortal soul and can only acquire that heavenly gift by winning the love of one of the sons of men. Their immortality depends upon union with men. Neither do the daughters of the air possess immortal souls, but they can acquire them by their own good deeds. We fly into hot countries where the children of the earth suffer from pestilential breezes and revive them with our fresh cooling breath. We perfume the atmosphere with the delicious fragrance of flowers, and thus spread the light and health of the earth. There is much suffering on earth, and we try to soothe it. By doing good for 300 years, we win immortality, receive a share of the eternal bliss of the human beings. You, poor little mermaid, having done and suffered so much following the impulse of your own heart, may now are performing deeds of kindness for 300 years. Also, acquire an immortal soul. The little mermaid lifted her transfigured face to the sun, and for the first time in her life, tears moistened her eyes. But there was some upheaval in the ship. The prince and his bride were looking for the new foundling. Sorrowfully they looked down into the foamy waters as if they knew she'd plunged into the sea. Unseen, she kissed the bridegroom's forehead, smiled at the bride, then with the other children of the air soared high above the rosy cloud which was sailing so peacefully with the ship. And the daughters of the air sang their lovely song. We fly invisibly over the dwellings of men, where there are children, and for every day we find a good child who gives pleasure to his parents and deserves their love. The good God shortens our time of probation. No child is aware that we're flitting about in his room, and knows that whenever joy brings a small smile, a year struck off from our 300. But when we see a naughty child, we weep bitter tears of sorrow, and every tear adds a day to our time of probation. Not really an easy song to sing, but oh well. Congrats on getting sick at that too. That story took over an hour. I had to pause ads twice. So now I'm unfortunately obliged to let them run because I have no more snoozes. I'm taking the pause 3 times, I guess. Yeah. But thank you for coming in. Sorry you had to hear the end of the story, but I'll have a vlog. And perhaps, maybe, you won't have to deal with a witch. Anyway, send a few. Okay, it says the ads are over, so I will take it for its face value. There is a joke down in chat. Should anyone want the Shucky Pooch? Oh, not a pooch, kind of a Shucky Fox. A Foxy Shuck? Oh. Yeah, Little Mermaid. Real long story. It was. Check. Little Mermaid was 32 pages long. Dang. The next two aren't quite as long. Might be able to do three more. Tinder-Box, Swineherd. What father says is always right. Yeah. We will see how far we get. Dang, I didn't mark the. I write it down my bookmark last week. Yeah, I cut the troll down. Anyway, our next story for the night, the Tinder-Box. A soldier came marching along the highway. Right, left, right, left. He had his knapsack on his back and his sword by his side, for he had been to the wars and was now returning home. And on the road he met an old witch, a horrid-looking creature she was, her lower lip hanging down almost to her neck, and she was waddling like an old limp rag. "Good evening, soldier," she said. "What a bright sword and what a large knapsack you have. You really do look like a soldier. I tell you what, you shall have as much money of your own as you could wish for." "Thank you very much, old witch," said the soldier. The witch now pointed to a large tree that stood close to the wayside and said, "Do you see this tree? It is quite hollow within. Climb up to the top, and you will find a hole large enough to creep through. Then tie a cord around your waist, and thus let yourself down to the trunk through that hole. If you want to come up again, all you have to do is call for me." "But what am I to do down in the tree?" asked the soldier. "What are you to do?" said the witch. "Why, fetch money, to be sure. As soon as you get to the bottom of the tree, you will find yourself in a wide passage lit by more than 300 lamps. Then you will see 3 doors. You can't open them. The keys are in the locks. On entering the first room, you will see in the middle of it a dog seated on a chest. His eyes are as large as teacups, but never you mind. Just go briskly up to him and set him down on this apron of mine. Once that is done, you can open the chest and take out as much money as you please. But the chest only contains copper coins. If you should like silver better, all you have to do is walk into the next room. There you will find a chest and a dog on it with eyes as large as mill wheels. But do not be afraid of him. You only have to set him down on my apron and then rifle through the chest at your leisure. But if you would rather have gold, you can have that too, as much as you can carry, if you walk into the third chamber. The dog that sits on this money chest has eyes as large as a church tower. But do not be alarmed. Just set him down on my apron, and he will do you no harm, and you can take as much from the chest as you like." "Not a bad plan," said the soldier. "But how much of the money am I to give you, old woman?" "Not a penny do I want," returned the witch. "The only thing I would like you to bring me is an old tinder-box which my grandmother left there by mistake the last time she was down in the tree." All right, then, said the soldier. Come and tie the rope around my waist. Here it is, said the witch, and here is my blue apron. And the soldier climbed the tree and let himself down inside. Here he found everything exactly as the witch had said. The passage was lit by more than 300 lamps, and behind the first door there was a dog who stared at him with eyes as large as teacups. There's a good boy, he said, as he spread the witch's apron on the floor and lifted the dog upon it. Then he helped himself to as many coppers as he could carry in his pockets. He shut the lid and put the dog back, and walked to the second room. There, if you please, sat the dog, with eyes as large as millstones. Don't stare at me so, remarked the soldier. It might weaken your eyesight. And with these words he set the dog down on the witch's apron. But when, on raising the lid of the chest, he beheld a vast quantity of silver contained, he threw all the coppers away and filled his pockets and knapsack with pure silver. Then he entered the third room. What a terrifying sight! That dog indeed had a pair of eyes as large as a church tower, and they kept rolling around and around. Good evening, said the soldier, and raised his cap respectfully. For such a monster of a dog as this he had never seen before or heard in his life. He stood still for a moment, looking at him. Then, thinking, the sooner it is done the better, he lifted the creature from his box and set him down on the apron, and opened the chest. What a lot of gold there was! Hastily, the soldier threw out all the silver money he had stuffed in his pockets and took the gold instead. Now he had enough money for a lifetime. He put the dog back onto the chest and opened the door behind him and called at the tree. Now, pull me up again, old witch. Have you got the old Tinder-Box? Asked the witch. Oh, sorry, I've quite forgotten it, shouted the soldier, and he went back to fetch it. The witch then pulled him up through the tree, and there was the highway. His pockets, knapsack, and cap, and even boots were stuffed with gold. Now, tell me what you're going to do with the Tinder-Box, said the soldier. That is no concern of yours, said the witch. You have got your money, now give me the Tinder-Box this instant. Well, take your choice, said the soldier. Either you tell me at once what the Tinder-Box is for, or I draw my sword and cut off your head. I won't tell you, screamed the witch, and her lower lip trembled. So the soldier drew his sword and cut off her head, and there she lay. But he did not waste time looking at what he had done. He knotted all the money securely in the witch's apron, and took the bundle on his back, and put the Tinder-Box into his pocket, and went straight for the nearest town. It was a large, handsome town, a city, in fact. He walked into the first hotel of the place, and asked for the best rooms and ordered the choicest and most expensive dishes for his supper, for now he was a rich man with plenty of gold to spend. The servant who had to clean his boots, however, could not help thinking they were disgracefully shabby and worn to belong to such a grand gentleman. But early the soldier went out to buy himself new clothes and boots. He had now become a very great man indeed, and people told him of all the places of amusement in the city, and of their king, and his beautiful daughter, the princess. I would rather like to see her, said the soldier. Well, no one can see her, was the reply. She lives in a large palace made of copper, surrounded by many walls and towers. No one but the king may go and visit her there, because it has been foretold that she will marry a common soldier, and our king will not like that. I'd like to see her now more than ever, thought the soldier, who could not obtain permission. And now he started on his very gay life, went to the theater and opera, and drove out to the royal gardens, gave a lot of money to the poor, because he knew how hard poverty can be. He always gaily dressed, and had a crowd of friends who declared he was the most capital fellow, on account of all his money. But as he was giving and spending every day, and never receiving anything in return, his money began to run out, and in the end he only had two pence, and was obliged to leave the splendid apartment, where he had lodged hitherto, and take refuge in a little attic chamber, where he had to brush his boots and darn his clothes himself, and where none of his friends ever came to see him, because there were so many stairs to go up. It was a very dark evening, and he could not afford to buy himself so much as a candle. All at once he remembered that there were a few matches lying in the tinder-box that the old witch had asked him to fetch out of the hollow tree. So he brought it out and began to strike a light. But no sooner had he rubbed the flintstone to make the sparks fly out, the door burst open, and the dog with the eyes as large as teacups who stood before him and said, "What commands my master for his slave?" "What is that?" said the soldier. It seemed a strange tinderbox. He struck it once, and the dog appeared to have guarded the copper coins. If he struck it twice, in came the dog with the silver. If he struck it 3 times, he was at once attended by the monstrous guardian of the golden treasure, and they brought him money and everything he wished for. So the soldier removed back to the princely apartment and brought himself an entirely new suit of clothing, and presently his friends turned up again. There were no stairs to climb when they wanted to see him now. One day it occurred to him that it was utterly strange that no one should be allowed to see the princess. What a waste of her beauty it was that she should be cooped up between copper walls. So he struck his tinderbox once, and lo and behold, there was the dog with his eyes the size of teacups. "It is rather late at night, I must admit," said the soldier, "but I would like to see the princess if for only 1 minute." The dog was out the door in a flash, and before the soldier had time to think, he had returned with the princess sitting asleep on his back. And she was so enchantingly beautiful that everyone knew immediately she was a princess. The soldier knelt down and kissed her hand. The dog ran back to the palace with the princess that very minute. However, the next morning, while she was at breakfast with the king and queen, she said that she had a very strange dream during the previous night. She had dreamt that she was riding a dog, an enormously large dog, and the soldier had knelt down to her and kissed her hand. "Pretty sort of dream indeed," said the queen, and she insisted that one of the ladies in waiting at the court should watch the princess's bedside during the following night to make sure that she was really only dreaming. The soldier had longingly acceded to see the fair princess of the Copper Palace again, so accordingly, the next evening he summoned the dog once more to fetch her. So he did, and ran as fast as he could. The lady in waiting, however, put on her boots and ran after them as fast as she could. When she saw the dog disappearing into a large house, she took out a piece of chalk and made a big white cross of the door to be able to find the house again the next day. Then she went home and betook herself to rest. But on his way back, the dog chanced to observe the white cross at the door of the hotel where the soldier lived. So he immediately took another piece of chalk and made crosses on every door throughout the town. Early in the morning, out came the king and queen, waiting, and all the officers of the household, to see where the princess had been. "Here it is," said the king when he first saw the first white cross. "No, it is there," said the queen, and pointed to a second door. "No, this is sure. Why, there's a cross too." They all cried together, discovering that there were crosses on all the doors. So they gave up their search. But the queen was exceedingly wise and imprudent. She took her golden scissors and cut a long piece of silk material into strips, as she made them into a neat little bag. The bag she filled with fine buttons and tied it to the princess's waist. She had, however, cut a hole in the bag, just large enough to let the seeds drop out gradually all the time the princess was moving. That evening the dog came again and took the princess on his back and ran away with her to the soldier. The soldier, who was still fonder of her and wished he were a prince, so as to be able to marry her. The dog never noticed how the seeds went dripping all the way to the princess, from the palace to the soldier's room, which she entered by the way of the window, climbing up that wall outside. So next morning the king and queen could easily discover where their daughter had been taken, and so they had the soldier arrested and cast into prison. But the story will could end there, couldn't it? But it doesn't. And now he was in prison, and it was dark and boring there, and the guard kept coming in to remind him that tomorrow he was to be hanged. Unfortunately, the soldier had left the tinderbox on the table in his room. When morning came through the narrow iron grafting in his window, he could watch the people hurrying along to see him hanged. He could hear the drums beating and the soldiers marching in the place of the execution. A crowd was rushing along, and the shoemaker's apprentice, with his leather apron and slippers, ran with such speed that one of his slippers flew off and bounded against the wall behind which the soldier was sitting, looking out from between the staves. "Stop!" shouted the soldier. "You don't have to be in such a hurry. If you want to make a little money, go to my lodgings and fetch me the tinder-box which I left on the end of the table. I'll give you 2 pence, but you have to get a move on." The shoemaker's boy raced to the aid and fetched the soldier's tinder-box. Outside the city, the gallows had been erected. Round it were marshaled the soldiers with thousands of people, men, women, and children. The king and queen were seated in magnificent thrones opposite the judges and the assembled council. The executioner was on the point of fitting the rope around the soldier's neck, when turning to the Majesties, he asked to be granted one last favor: to smoke a pipe of tobacco. We are not promoting smoking habits. The executioner. The king could not refuse this harmless request. Accordingly, the soldier took out his tinder-box and struck the flint once, twice, 3 times. And lo, all the 3 wizard dogs were standing before him. "Now help me, and don't let me get hanged," said the soldier, and forthwith the dogs fell upon the judges and the councillors, and tossing them highly into the air till they fell down on the ground again. They were all badly hurt. "Don't touch me!" shouted the king, but the monster dog with the large eyes, as large as the church tower, seized both him and the queen, and flung them up in the air with the councillors. And the soldiers and people were frightened and shouted out with one voice, "Good soldier, you shall be our king, and the beautiful princess shall be your wife and our queen." Then they put the soldier in the royal carriage, and all the 3 dogs bounded to and fro in front and shouted, "Hurrah!" The little boys whistled, and the guards presented arms. The princess was sent for and made queen, which she liked much better than living as a prisoner in the copper palace. The bridal festivities lasted for 8 whole days, and the 3 dogs sat at the banqueting table staring at them about with their big eyes. Those would have to be some massive puppy dog eyes. Yeah, big puppers. That's it. My model freeze. Can't have that happening. Anyway. Our next story, The Swineherd. There was once a prince who had a kingdom, but the kingdom was very small. Still, it was large enough to get married upon, and he was very anxious to get married. It was certainly a bit of cheek for him to say to the emperor's daughter, "Will you have me?" But that is what he did. His name was renowned far and wide, and hundreds of princesses would have said yes gladly, and would have even felt flattered. But let us see what the emperor's daughter did. It happened that where the prince's father lay buried, there grew a rose tree. The most beautiful rose tree which blossomed only once every 5 years, and even then only bore 1 flower. What a rose it was! It smelled so sweet that all cares and sorrows were forgotten by him in what hailed its fragrance. And furthermore, the prince had a nightingale which would sing in such a manner that it seemed as though all sweet melodies dwelt in her little throat. The emperor's daughter was to have both the rose and the nightingale, and the prince sent them to her in large silver caskets. The emperor had them brought into the large hall where the princess was playing with her ladies in waiting. They never did anything else.
"Oh, presents!"
exclaimed the princess, and clapped her hands.
"If it were but a little pussy-cat!"
But when the beautiful rose came through,
"Oh, how prettily it is made!"
said all the ladies in waiting. "It is more than pretty," said the emperor. "It is utterly beautiful." But the princess touched it, and was nearly in tears.
"Fie, papa," she said. "It is not made at all. It is natural."
"Fie!" cried the ladies in waiting.
"It's a natural rose."
Let us see what is in the other casket before we get annoyed, said the Emperor. So the nightingale came forth and sang so delightfully that at first no one would say anything ill-humored about her.
Superb! Charmante!
Exclaimed the ladies in waiting, for they all spoke French. One worse than the other. How this bird reminds me of a musical box that belonged to a blessed empress, remarked the knight. Yes, these are the same tones, the same presentation. Yes, yes, said the Emperor, as he wept like a child at the memory.
I hope it's not a real bird,
said the princess. Yes, it's a real bird, said those who brushed him.
Well then, let the bird fly at once,
said the princess, and she positively refused to see the prince. However, the young prince did not allow himself to be discouraged. He daubed his face with brown and black, and pulled his cap over his ears, and knocked at the door. Good day, my lord emperor, he said. Can I have employment at the palace? Why, yes, said the emperor. There are not so many who seek employment here. Let me have a look at you. All I need is someone to take care of the pigs, for we have a great many of them. So the prince was appointed imperial swineherd. He was given a dark little hovel next to the pigsty, and there he sat the whole day and worked. When evening came, he had made a pretty little saucepan. It was extremely attractive little gadget. It looked charming. Small bells were hung all around it, and as soon as the water inside was boiled, these little bells tinkled in the sweetest manner and played the old tune. Oh dear Augustine, 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 everything has gone, gone, gone. But what was still more curious about the saucepan was that whoever held his finger into the steam coming from it and smelled all the dishes that were cooking on the stoves all over the city. This, of course, was something quite different from the rose. Now the princess and her ladies-in-waiting happened to walk that way when she heard the bells tinkling, and she stood quite still and seemed pleased, for she knew the tune. There was only a piece she could play on the piano, and she played it with one finger.
Why, there's my piece, she said. Swineherd must certainly have been well educated. Go and ask him how much he wants for the instrument.
So one of the ladies in waiting had to go to the sheepherd's room, but before she entered it, she slipped the wooden clogs over her silk sandals.
How much do you want for the saucepan?
inquired the lady.
10 kisses from the princess, said Swineherd.
Heaven forbid, said the lady in waiting.
I cannot sell it for less,
said the swineherd.
Oh, what does he say?
asked the princess.
I cannot tell you really, replied the lady. It is too awful. Then whisper it into my ear, said the princess.
So the lady in waiting whispered it.
He is an impudent fellow,
said the princess, and went straight on. But hardly had she gone a little way when the bells started again and tinkled so merrily.
Oh, my dear Augustine, 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 everything has gone, gone, gone. Go and ask him, said the princess, if he will be satisfied with 10 kisses from the ladies of my court.
No, thank you, answered the swineherd. It is 10 kisses from the princess, or I keep my saucepan.
This is too annoying, said the princess. Stand around me, all of you, so that no one may see us.
And the ladies in waiting placed themselves around her and spread out their wide dresses. The swineherd received 10 kisses from the princess, and she got the saucepan. It was, of course, well worth while. The princess kept the saucepan boiling in the evening all the next day. It did not merely play its catchy tune. It also told them what was cooking in every fire throughout the city, be it in the chamberlain's kitchen or the cobbler's. The ladies in waiting danced and clapped their hands, even the charlatan thought it was lovely.
Don't give me away, said the princess, for I am the emperor's daughter.
And they all swore they would never breathe a word about the matter. The prince, or rather the swineherd, for he knew that he was of the swine, did not let a day pass without working on something new. This time he constructed a rattle, which, when it was swung around, played all the waltzes and tunes that have ever been heard since the creation of the world. Again the princess passed by and heard the tunes. Immediately she sent over one of her ladies to inquire the price of the instruments.
But mind you, he shall have no more kisses, she added. Now he wants to have 100 kisses from the princess, said the lady who had been sent to ask. He cannot be in his right senses,
replied the princess, and walked on. But when she had gone a little way, she stopped again, thinking hard.
I should encourage, she said. It is the duty of an emperor's daughter. Go and tell him he may have 10 kisses from me as yesterday, and that he may take the rest from the lady's foot. Oh, but we should not like that at all, said the ladies. What are you grumbling about? Rejoined the princess. If I can kiss this swineherd, surely you can. Remember, you owe everything to me.
There was nothing they could do about it, and one lady-in-waiting had to go to him again and deliver the message. 100 kisses from the princess, said Swineherd, or each of us keeps what is his.
You have to stand around me again, said the princess.
And the ladies-in-waiting did as they were bidden, while the kissing was going on. Just then the emperor happened to step out on his balcony. He rubbed his eyes and put on his spectacles. What can be the reason there's such a crowd near our pigsty? He muttered. They're the ladies of the court. I must go down and see what they are about. So he pulled on his slippers to the heels, for he had trodden them flat and rushed down. Oh, how could he run? As soon as he got into the yard, he moved very softly, but the ladies-in-waiting would not have heard him anyway. They were so much engrossed by counting the kisses so that they might be fair, and the swineherd should neither receive too many, nor should he get too few. Now the emperor rose on tiptoe behind the smallest of the ladies-in-waiting and watched. What is all this? He said when he saw what was going on. Just then the swineherd was taking the 86th kiss. The emperor boxed his daughter's ears with a slipper, and he also said to the swineherd, Out with you both, he shouted furiously. And the princess and the swineherd were thrown out of the city. Now the princess stood and wept, and the rain poured down, and the swineherd grumbled.
Oh, what an unhappy creature I am, moaned the princess. If I had married the handsome prince, oh, how miserable I am.
Then the swineherd now hid himself behind a tree. There he washed the black and brown color from his face, and threw off his dirty clothes, and stepped forth in his princely robes. He looked so noble that the princess could not help bowing before him. But that was no longer any good. I have come to despise you, he said. You do not want to marry an honest prince. You do not prize a beautiful natural rose and a charming living nightingale. But you are quite ready to kiss a shabby swineherd for the sake of some tuppetry toys. You deserve all that has happened to you. Then he traveled back to his own little kingdom, walked proudly into his palace, and shut the door in her face. The princess was left outside, and, well, might she say?
Oh, my dear Augustine, 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 everything has gone, gone.
Yeah, she got what she deserves. We got quite a few kisses. Anyway. The next story, hopefully I can finish. What father does is always right. And I should have read this for Father's Day. Anyway. What father does is always right. Now I'm going to tell you a story which I heard when I was very small. And every time when I later remembered it, I thought that it became more and more beautiful. It happens with stories as it does with human beings. Some of them grow more beautiful with age, and that is the delightful thing of it. You have, I'm sure,
been in the country, you have seen a genuine farmstead with its thatched roof and moss and herbs in its garden. There's a stork's nest on the gable, the walls are crooked, the windows low, and only one of them can be opened. The baking oven looks like a fat little belly, and the lilac tree tops down over the and the lilac tree drops its branches over the fence. Right beneath the knotty willow tree is a little pond with a duck and some small ducklings. Oh, yes, and there is a chained dog who barks at everyone. There is such a farmhouse out in the country, and it is there lived some people, namely the farmer and his wife. They owned very little, but even of that they could spare something, and that something was a horse, which grazed in the ditch by the side of the road. Father used it for riding into town. The neighbors borrowed it now and then, and reciprocated it occasionally with one good turn or another. Perhaps it would have been an advantage for the farmer and his wife to sell the horse and buy something that would be still more useful than the proceeds. But what could that be? You know best, father, said the wife. For there's a fair in town. Go there and let them give you money for that horse, or exchange it for something useful. Whatever you do, be right. Just go to the fair. And then she tied his kerchief around his neck, because that is something that she could do better than he. She made a double loop, which looked very smart. Then she brushed his hat with her flat palm and kissed him tenderly. And so he went off to the horse that was to be sold or exchanged, because father knew best what to do. The sun was burning down, and there was not a cloud in sight, for the road was very dusty indeed. Many people were traveling to the fair, carriages, on horseback, and on foot. It was extremely hot, and there was no shade on the highway. One man was going along, and he drove a cow before him. A cow as beautiful as could be. That cow would supply delicious milk, thought the farmer. That would be a marvelous exchange if I could get her. Look here, my friend, he said to the man who was leading the cow. Let us have a chat. You see, a horse is dearer than a cow, I believe, but that does not matter. To me, a cow is more useful. Shall we make an exchange? All right, said the man with the cow, and so they exchanged. After that, the farmer could have turned around and gone home, for the deal had been transacted. But he has made up his mind to go to the fair, and he decided that he would go, even if he were only to have a look. And so he went along with his cow. He walked at a good pace, and the cow walked at a good pace, and soon they were walking next to a man who was leading a sheep. It was a nice sheep, and well nourished, and with a fine coat of wool. I should like to have that, thought the farmer. He could graze nicely in our ditch, and during the winter we could take him into our room. It might be better to have a sheep than a cow. I wonder if I should change with the man. Yes, the owner of the sheep was not adverse to the idea, and the deal was made. The farmer walked along the highway with his sheep. Then he saw a man who carried a big, fat goose under his arm. That is a heavy animal you've got there, said the farmer. That goose has feathers as well as fat. She would look well in our yard by the pond. Mother would enjoy collecting scraps to feed her. How many times she used to say, if only I had a goose. Now she can have one. And she should have one. Would you like an exchange? Yes, ma'am. I'll give you my sheep and my sincere thanks. Yes, the other man would like to do that, and so they exchanged. The farmer took the goose. It was quite near town, and the crowds on the road thickened. Humans and animals abounded, and they all walked along the road and across the ditch and into the toll collector's potato field. The toll collector had tied his chicken to a tree so that it could not fly into a panic or lose its way. It was a short-legged hen who blinked with one eye and looked nice. What? She said. I'm sorry I cannot tell you what she was thinking, but I can tell you what the farmer thought when he saw her. This is the prettiest hen I have ever seen. She is prettier than the vicar's breeding hen. I wish I could have her. The hen will always find corn. She can practically look after herself. It might be a good exchange if I could get her instead of the goose. Shall we change? He asked. Change? Said the old man. Yeah, why not? And so they changed. The toll collector took a goose, and the farmer got the chicken. The things he had achieved on his journey into town were simply marvelous. Now he was really warm and he was very tired. Drinking a bite of bread would do him a world of good. As he was not far from an inn, he decided that he would stop. That very moment, the steward of the inn was trying to walk out. He was carrying a sack that was filled to the brim with something. They met on the threshold. "What have you got there?" asked the farmer. "Rotten apples," said the steward. "Oh, sackful, all for the pigs." "That is an incredible amount," said the farmer. "I wish mother could see it. Last year we only had a single apple on our entire apple tree at the bottom of our gardens. We were going to save that apple and keep it in a chest of drawers until it burst." "Apples are wealth," said mother. Here she would see some wealth. It would be a wonderful sight for her. "What are you going to give me for them?" asked the steward. "Give you?" said the farmer. "I'll give you my chicken in exchange." And so he gave the steward the chicken and took hold of the apples. Then he walked straight into the inn and right up to the bar. He placed a sack of apples against the stove, but there was a fire in the stove, and he had not considered that. There were many guests at the bar, floor sealers, ox drovers, and 2 Englishmen. Later, they were so rich that their pockets were bulging with gold coins, and they were making bets. Just listen. There was a hissing sound near the stove. The apples had begun to crackle. "What is that?" said the English gentleman, and the farmer told them. He told them that of the horse he had exchanged for the cow, and so on until he got the rotten apples. "Well, mother will box your ears for that when you get home," said the Englishman. "There will be a devil of a row." "Oh, no," said the farmer. "I shall get kisses, not boxes on the ear. My mother says what father does is always right." "Let's bet," they said. "Heaps of gold coins." "A whole bushelful will suffice," said the farmer. "I offer you a bushelful of rotten apples in exchange for myself and mother on top, but that is more than enough." "Done," they said, and the bet was made. The innkeeper's carriage was brought along. The Englishman got in, the farmer got in, the rotten apples were rode on, and that is how they drove along the dusty highway right up to the farmer's house. "Good evening, mother." "Oh, welcome, father." "I've made an exchange." "I knew that you would do the right thing," said the woman, and she hugged him and completely failed to notice the sack and the strangers. "I exchanged the horse for a cow." "Oh, that is lovely," said his wife. "Now we can have milk dishes, butter, and cheese. What a good exchange." "Well, yes, then I exchanged a cow for a sheep." "That is even better," said the woman. "You are always so thoughtful. You have just enough grass to feed a sheep. Now we'll have a sheep's milk and sheep's cheese and warm woolen stockings and nice warm bed jackets. We would not have had that from a cow. You are such a good provider." "But I exchanged a sheep for a goose." Try that again. "But I exchanged a sheep for a goose." "Lovely! We can have a goose for Christmas this year. Dear father, you think of nothing but how to give me pleasure. What a nice thought of yours. We can leave the goose in the garden and it will get even fatter until Christmas comes along." "But I exchanged the goose for a chicken," said the man. "A chicken!" replied the woman. "That was a clever exchange. The chicken will lay eggs and she will hatch them and we shall have pullets. In the end we shall have a whole chicken run. I always wanted to have one." "Yes, but I exchanged a chicken for a sackful of rotten apples," said the farmer at last. "You really deserve to be kissed," said the wife. "Thank you so much, dear husband. Now I'm going to tell you something. When you were away, I thought of a lovely meal I could prepare when you return. There was an omelet with chives. I had eggs, but there were no chives, so I went over to the schoolmaster. I know that they have chives in their garden, but the woman was very mean. I know that. I asked her if she would lend me some chives. And lend, she said. Nothing whatsoever grows in our garden, not even your apples. There's nothing I could lend you. And now I see I can lend her 10 rotten apples, even a whole sackful. That will be a joke, father." And she pressed a hearty kiss on his mouth. "We like that," said the Englishman. "Down and down you go, and cheerful you remain. That is worth a lot of money." And they gave a bushelful of gold coins to the farmer, who got kisses from his wife and not boxes on the ear. You see, it is always a good thing when a woman says father is a clever man, and what he does is always right. You see, that is the story. I heard it when I was a small child, and now you have heard it too. I know full well. What father does is always right. What father does is always. That is a good story, though. But now we need to find someone to raid. Because the next story that would come up is a steadfast sense order, and I know I would not get that done in time. I've got no more pauses to use. So, who is on that we can see? I see a jump scare opportunity. You want to raid someone that's playing a spooky game? Yeah, again, not my hair. It's not great when my fluff is tickled. Oh, sure, now the music starts. Anyway, jump scare raid? Sound good? It's Phasmophobia, so it's going to be a fun, jumpy raid. I'm not going to use a regular raid message, just say jump scare raid. And if you have a spooky emote handy, you can use it. Hell, if you don't, just unlock one of mine. So let's see, do I have the emote unlock? How about the modify? Who's it? How do I not have unlock an emote? I need to fix that. No, it's only 100 points. 100 points to choose an emote to unlock. So, feel free to do so, because it'll just make it funnier. Because I'm going to use this message. So, hopefully I will see everyone Monday if I can get Baldur's Gate running. I have high hopes. Not high apple pie sky hopes, but I've got high hopes. So I will hopefully see you all then. Night, everyone.